there's something to be said for what happened during my hiatus from doing this show, during my hiatus from doing Revenge of the Fans and kind of like pouring all of my fanboy energy out into the public. Because this pandemic forced me, not that it forced me, but our way to get through the pandemic and the quarantine was to basically use entertainment for its greatest form, for its greatest use, which is to escape, to take us away from our troubles for a little while. And what happened during the quarantine was that, listen, I don't know if you know this, but I live in Queens, and we're about 15 minutes from Elmhurst Hospital, which was basically like ground zero here in New York City. I forget the stats, but Elmhurst Hospital, the emergency room there was, it became such a story that eventually people kicked in money and the hospital is going to send their entire staff on these all expense paid trips to thank them for what they did in April, for enduring the insanity. And listen, if you're one of those people who was fortunate enough to not live near a hotspot and who primarily experienced this pandemic as, something on the news or something you read about on social media, but it didn't really, approach you in any real way, please consider yourself incredibly lucky, because we live right here in Queens. And in April, during like the worst part of this whole thing, there was not a time of day where there wasn't an ambulance siren in the air. It got to the point where like it became white noise. I would like block it out, but my wife would point it out. And literally any time of day, whether it's 7 a.m. or 10 o'clock at night, if you close your eyes and extend your ear out a little bit, you'd hear the faint sounds of an ambulance racing its way probably to Elmhurst Hospital. And you'd say a little prayer for the New Yorker who's currently on their way to a place where you're hearing on the news that there aren't enough ventilators and that the death rate is, I don't want to, get too heavy on you here. But it was a very scary period here in New York City for a while, especially for the entire month of April. And it hit close to home. My mother-in-law, my kid's grandma got COVID. And thankfully, she's a tough broad and she got through it. But, grandma got COVID. Our next door neighbor, I don't want to, but just it affected the house directly beside ours. There was a gentleman who I've known for years, Pete, who I'd see him every day outside, raking the leaves, working on his garden, doing his thing. Pete's gone now. It was a very tough time here for us New Yorkers. For everyone around the world. But, New York was basically like the epicenter here in the United States for a while. And I was right near the epicenter of the epicenter in Elmhurst, which is the town where I first lived, by the way. So I have very warm memories of Elmhurst. That's the first place I ever lived, but it was damn near the scariest, most stressful place you could be in the month of April. But what we did here in Casa Robles, and which I really kind of spearheaded, and it was actually helped by the fact that prior to the pandemic, my wife, who's also, aside from being a special ed teacher in the Bronx, is also an actress on her private time. She booked a musical and she was doing this production of Nonsense and she needed to be rehearsing a lot. So through January and February, me and the kids had a lot of time home alone while mommy was out rehearsing 2 or 3 nights a week. And during those 2 or 3 nights, I kind of established a flow with them. Because again, now that I wasn't pouring all my fanboy energy out into the public, I kind of wanted to use it to bond with my kids a little bit. So during those months when mommy was away, Daddy curated a lot of fun nights of entertainment. That's where I began the movie night tradition where we would turn off all the lights and I'd make the popcorn and we would literally treat it like we're at the theaters. That's when I introduced them to professional wrestling, which is like one of my very first fanboy loves and which has come back in a big way in the last year or two. I got into this, they had expressed a little bit of interest. And I managed to turn that little bit of interest into creating 2 full-blown wrestling fanatics over these last few months by doing little things like literally like curating little playlists. Like tonight tonight's agenda is to walk you through the arc of Hulk Hogan's career. So we're going to start at WrestleMania. I mean, I wouldn't tell them this, but in my mind, I would basically work out this whole thing. Like, here, we're going to start at WrestleMania 3. We're going to establish him as the big heroic hero who takes down the giant and all the big crazy villains. But then now we're going to skip to Bash at the Beach 96, and we're going to show you his shocking heel turn. And now that he's a heel, we're going to show you the night that Goldberg defeated him for the world title, and the Georgia Dome went insane because Goldberg, the unstoppable beast, vanquished the now evil, villainous Hollywood Hogan. And not only did I do that to kind of show the Hogan arc and a couple of the most historic moments in professional wrestling. I'm sorry I'm boring some of you with this. I'll get through it in just a moment. But the part I would, the reason I would show that Hogan arc too and include the Goldberg bit was because Goldberg is still present in contemporary wrestling. 20 years later, 20-something years later, Goldberg is still on WWE TV on occasion, and he's treated like a special, attraction. So part of my plan here was like, if I teach them the history of these characters, it'll get them to invest right away in the new in the current product. And it was pretty cool because after I did that Hogan night, and I showed Goldberg beating him for the title, then the next day I showed Goldberg fighting The Fiend in present day. And to them it was like, oh my God, Goldberg. So there were lots of nights like that where I would give them little like entertainment history lessons through wrestling, or even like as I'm trying to get them into the Batman mythology. I told you guys this several months ago, that I was using Batman, the animated series, as a way to teach them the pillars of the Batman mythos. And that really worked amazingly. And, I really leaned into bringing all of this fanboy passion home and using it to sort of explain too. I don't just put these things on and then just hope they'll be amused by them. I give them like a history. I give them, in a fun sort of way, I give them the context for what they're going to watch and the things they should look out for. And then when it's over, I'd ask questions like, what was it about Two-Face that made what happened to him so tragic? Because let's say like at the end of watching the two-part Two-Face origin from Batman, the animated series. And we would have these interesting discussions about the story and what was interesting and what was sad and what was cool and what was your favorite part of it. Is there anything you didn't understand? And it was really kind of like amazing because my kids never got bogged down by this pandemic. Because once it arrived, we were already like a well-oiled fanboy and fangirl and geek machine, I should say. So for the months that we basically couldn't leave the house because everything around us was chaos, we just literally closed the shades, locked the doors, and turned our living room into like entertainment central and like escape central. And to me, like, it was very gratifying because I've always said, while we may all obsess about this stuff and go on Twitter and Facebook and Reddit and fight and heckle each other over our opinions over entertainment, or what could have been better about this movie, or what was a blown chance, or what was the greatest ever and what was the worst ever, while we love to do all that, at the end of the day, we're overcomplicating something quite simple. Entertainment is an escape, and it's arguably the greatest escape because you don't have to go anywhere or do anything. The best entertainment basically just ignites your own imagination and lifts you up from your couch in your living room to a whole other adventure. And now you're following these other characters on their interesting stories. You're you're seeing incredible spectacle. You're hearing wonderful music. That was a cool thing too. My daughter has taken after me, where she actually cares about the creatives who are working on these movies. So like I've been teaching her about directors and about composers. So now my 9-year-old daughter can talk to you about John Williams and can recognize when something sounds very Williams-like. And by the way, she had the most amazing summer in that regard because coincidentally, Williams was basically the soundtrack to our summer. because first we did a Harry Potter marathon where every Friday we went through each Harry Potter movie. Then, as I told you, we had our Summer of Superman, which also had more John Williams music. And then we even, wait, what was the other Williams piece that we watched? I'm blanking out now. This does not make for good radio or good television. But for those of you watching on YouTube, by the way, I hope you're enjoying the little visual things I throw in every now and again and the little sound cues. I really try to make the YouTube show kind of its own thing, so to speak. So for those of you who are enjoying this as an audio show, right now I'm very confused trying to remember what the other freaking John Williams thing was that they watched. But the point is, my daughter now, I mean, first of all, they know about Jaws because I love to hum that when we're in the pool. And I go, dun, dun, and I pretend to be a shark and they swim away from me and it's a lot of fun. But I just love that my 9-year-old daughter can talk to you about John Williams. She knows who George Lucas is and Steven Spielberg. And, you know, she can actually talk to you about the creative forces behind these spectacles that, you know, that she's enjoying. You know, I'm teaching her to enjoy entertainment in a way similar to that I do, where like, yeah, I enjoy it for what it is at face value, but I also kind of always have this thing where I want to know who made this? Why did they make this? Did they make other things? Are there similar themes in their work? All that sort of stuff. And my daughter seems to have inherited that. And it's pretty neat. But, you know, I just kind of wanted to hit on that because that is something that was a positive about my long hiatus away from all of this. Because it allowed me to really kind of invest in bringing all of that energy and attention to detail and passion to my kids. And now my kids, you know, they got through one of the scariest historical situations any kid in 2020 or in their lifetime is going to have to deal with. And they got through it with minimal issues, with minimal trauma, with minimal concern or anxiety. My kids were shielded from all of that, because I basically opened up my heart to them and shared all the things I'm passionate about with them and kind of helped kind of build a cocoon using some of the greatest, most iconic characters and artists of all time to help insulate them from all the terror outside our doors. So, you know, it was pretty special. And I hope everyone else, by the way, I hope you got through this pandemic unscathed, and that your friends and family are doing okay, and that you found ways to cope. Because if you're like me and you're near a hotspot, or you dealt with this COVID thing in a way that was personal, if it hit close to home, you know, I'd love to hear what you did to kind of stay sane. Because what I did was basically just pour all my energy into my wife and kids and making sure that we were as entertained and excited as possible. You know, whether it was movie nights, whether it was game nights, whether it was family Mario Party night on the Switch, you know, every night was a different sort of group-based activity where we were all just, you know, lost in each other. And, you know, nothing outside mattered. And honestly, in a weird way, it reminds me of what my abuela has said about her time in Cuba. You know, when she lived there during the poverty years. I mean, unfortunately for some Cubans, or for a lot of Cubans who are still there, it's still poverty time. But when she was raising my mother and my aunt, you know, Elizabeth Pena, the actress who's no longer with us, when she was raising them in Cuba, she used to say that, like, the happiest times in her life was when they had nothing, because they had each other. It forced them to band together, and there was so much love and so much support and so much kindness that she never cried for a single moment. She never lamented or pitied or felt any kind of negativity, because she had her family. And there was so much love in the house that people knew that, like, okay, we can't rely on bells and whistles and distractions and other things. So we have to be kind to each other and love one another and band together as a team. And, you know, she's always sort of instilled the importance of that in me. And I guess it influenced the way I chose to handle this pandemic. And it really felt like that. It felt like the world outside our doors was on fire, between health concerns, between political concerns, between, just the literal, there's stuff right outside affecting us. And, we had each other. And I used all of my imaginary best friends to help coax them through this. I used Superman, I used Batman, I used Hulk Hogan, I used all my, all the things that got me through being a lonely kid growing up. I used to keep my kids safe and insulated from the chaos outside our doors.